Welcome, everyone. Let's just dive right into this explainer, where we're going to uncover the deep structural architecture of classical Indian philosophy. I'm absolutely thrilled to be your guide today as we explore a tradition of thought whose depth and richness completely rivals European philosophy. So if you're ready to expand your mind and look at reality through a totally different, ancient lens, well, you're definitely in the right place. Right off the bat, let's draw a really crucial parallel here. When we think of philosophy today, we usually picture, dusty textbooks or highly theoretical, abstract debates that honestly don't impact our daily routines at all. But in both the ancient Indian and Western traditions, like the ancient Greeks and Romans, philosophy was never just some theoretical activity. It was a profound, practical way of life. It's kind of less like reading an instruction manual and way more like downloading a whole new operating system for your entire existence.
Okay, here's our syllabus for today's session. We'll be looking at 1. Philosophy as a practice, 2. The ancient Vedic tradition, 3. Self, cosmos, and rebirth, 4. The classical Indian Darshanas, and finally, 5. Yoga and the 8 limbs. We're going to move logically from the grand macrocosm of the ancient universe all the way down to the microcosm of individual practice.
All right, Section 1, Philosophy as a Practice, More Than Theoretical Activity. Let's kick things off by grounding ourselves in the historical timeline. When did this foundational practice actually emerge? This timeline brilliantly illustrates just how far back we're really going. The Indian philosophical traditions are actually a few centuries older than the earliest European ones. We're talking about some of the oldest recorded inquiries into reality, period. Between 1500 and 900 BCE, Indo-Aryan tribes in northern India were composing the early Vedas. Then, around 1200 BCE, the Kuru monarchs stepped in, unifying these clans and codifying their secret ancestral knowledge. Later on, between 800 and 200 BCE, we see the composition of the Upanishads. To put that into perspective for a second, this massive intellectual groundwork was being laid down literally hundreds of years before Socrates ever walked the streets of Athens. Wild, right?
Moving right along to Section 2, the ancient Vedic tradition, the earliest philosophical texts. The absolute crucial point here is understanding the bedrock of these traditions, which are the 4 Vedas.
The 4 Vedas, that's the Rig Veda, Samaveda, Yajurveda, and Atharvaveda, are the oldest of the Hindu scriptures. Now, the texts state that these works were divinely inspired, and for generations, priests orally transmitted the sacred word, which is exactly why they're called Shruti, a Sanskrit word meaning hearing. Think of it like a massive, multi-generational relay race, but instead of a baton, they're passing down the exact auditory recitation of divine truth, and they perfectly preserved it for hundreds of years before anyone ever wrote a single word of it down.
So, as the Kuru dynasty rose and this Brahmanic or priestly culture really started to develop, the literature evolved into 4 distinct sections. You can see the focus gradually shifting here. It starts with the Samhitas, which are the original mantras and hymns. Then come the Aranyakas and Brahmanas. Those are directives and commentaries on rituals and sacrifice. And finally, we reach the Upanishads, containing these incredibly deep philosophical reflections. It's basically a steady progression from pure ritualistic practice straight into profound metaphysical questioning.
The Upanishads eventually became the philosophical core of Hinduism, and the literal translation here is super revealing. Upanishad derives from upa, meaning near, ni, meaning down, and shad, meaning to sit. It literally describes students sitting down near their teacher's feet. They weren't just sitting there taking notes, though. They were absorbing these esoteric doctrines about the true nature of reality, stuff that exists far, far beyond mere sense perception. All right, on to Section 3, Self, Cosmos, and Rebirth, the metaphysical architecture. Let's see how all of this builds into their core metaphysical worldview, essentially connecting the individual directly to the vast universe. The Vedic texts boldly claim there's a structural analogy between the macrocosm and the microcosm. They propose that by engaging in deep inner reflection on yourself, you can actually come to understand the entire cosmos. It's like realizing that looking inward through a microscope reveals the exact same fundamental patterns as looking outward through a giant telescope. Because the self and the universe share the same form, true knowledge of the world literally begins with true knowledge of the self. To really grasp this structural analogy in a practical sense, just look at how the physical world mirrors the spiritual and social worlds. Take the cycle of the natural seasons. That mirrors the cyclical nature of the universe, and by extension, the cycle of human birth, death, and rebirth, right? Reincarnation. Similarly, Hindu theology assigned a rigid hierarchical structure to the cosmos, with a triple deity standing above other gods. Well, this cosmic hierarchy was perfectly mirrored on Earth in the rigid social caste systems that first developed during the Vedic period. As above, so below.
Now, this brings us to a really pivotal question. In fact, it essentially shaped the rest of classical Indian philosophy. If the universe is cyclical, and we're just trapped in this constant loop of birth, death, and rebirth, how do we put an end to it? How do we actually get out? The texts suggest that the answer lies entirely in purification and achieving ultimate freedom from this cycle.
Which leads us to Section 4, the classical Indian Darshanas, 6 orthodox schools. The quest to answer that monumental question about escaping the cycle gave rise to distinct schools of thought, all designed to help practitioners achieve ultimate liberation. The term darshana gives us such a beautiful framework for these schools. It derives from the Sanskrit word meaning to view. But listen, it's not a passive viewing at all. It's a reciprocal experience. When a believer beholds a deity or a holy person or a sacred object, they are beheld in return. So when we talk about the 6 classical schools of Hindu philosophy, we're talking about 6 darshanas, 6 totally unique ways of seeing the divine and being seen by it. You can think of them as 6 different lenses or methodologies to approach ultimate reality. Okay, so there are 6 orthodox Hindu darshanas, and I really want you to notice how incredibly diverse their primary focuses are here. You've got Nyaya, which focuses strictly on logic and epistemology, arguing that false knowledge is the actual root of suffering. Then you have Vaisheshika, which developed this fascinating early form of naturalism and atomism. There's Mimamsa, focusing on language, duties, and rituals. And Vedanta, focusing on Brahman as the unchanging cause of the universe. Every single school offers a completely different methodological path toward purification and liberation.
Let's zoom in a bit on one of the earliest of these schools, Samkhya. Samkhya is a dualistic philosophy, but trust me, it's way more complex than the kind of dualism you might find in typical Western philosophy. It basically holds that everything is composed of 2 things, Purusha, which is pure absolute consciousness, and Prakriti, which is matter. Living beings only occur when Purusha and Prakriti bond together. The ultimate goal, that liberation we keep talking about, only happens when the mind is finally completely freed from the bondage of matter. All right, Section 5, Yoga and the 8 Limbs, stopping the movement of thought. For our final section, we're going to dive into a darshana I know you definitely recognize by name, though honestly, its true philosophical depth is rarely taught in the West today.
Originally a part of the Samkhya school and later compiled by the sage Patanjali around 400 BCE, yoga was never, ever just a fitness practice. True yoga is the profound mental process through which an individual's soul joins with the supreme soul. And how exactly is this achieved? By stopping the movement of thought. It's only when the endless chatter of the mind is entirely stilled that the distinction between the observer and the observed can finally be overcome.
Patanjali outlined this intense spiritual journey in 8 progressive limbs, which brilliantly illustrates just how comprehensive the whole system really is. Now, in the modern world, people usually jump straight to step 3, asana, or postures. But look at the foundation here. You can't build a house starting with the roof, right? The practice actually begins with yamas, strict moral restraints like nonviolence and not stealing. Then comes niyamas, personal codes of conduct like purity, self-study, and contentment. It's only after you've aligned your moral and personal conduct that you even attempt the physical postures and breath control.
And as we climb the final 4 limbs, the practice moves entirely inward, completely leaving the physical realm behind. You have to master the senses to achieve a peaceful mind, which is then followed by deep concentration on just a single point. This naturally flows right into the 7th limb, true meditation, which ultimately allows the practitioner to reach the 8th and final limb, samadhi. Samadhi is the ultimate oneness of the self and true reality, the supreme soul. It is the exact purification and liberation that those ancient Vedic texts were seeking all along. I'm going to leave you with this thought to reflect upon as we wrap up this explainer session today. Classical Indian philosophy isn't just some ancient history, it's an incredibly detailed roadmap for navigating human existence. The fact that these teachings, especially yoga, have been incorporated into cultures globally over millennia, well, it proves their absolute enduring appeal. Whether you adopt the whole system or just want to understand its logic, it really invites us all to ask how these ancient instructions might guide our modern search for peace. So, think about those 8 limbs. Where could you start today? Thank you so much for joining me on this incredible journey through the mind and the cosmos. Keep exploring and keep